With the threat of the Turks at their doors, an empire enlists the help of a renowned knight and his army. However, the beauty of their princess distracts him from victory, which might spell doom for their empire. The emperor welcomes Sir Tirante and his army to Constantinople, hoping that they can help them defeat the invading Turks who killed his son. Tirante then meets with the empress, who's still hiding behind a veil of mourning. Instead, Tirante's squire, Hippolytus, kisses her feet to show adoration and respect. One of the attendants, Inez, whispers to Tirante that he now has the power to lift the veils of mourning as a promise to save them. The emperor grants him permission, so the knight opens the windows and lifts the veil, seeing the empress's face. He then vows to fight in honor of their fallen son. He then approaches their princess, Carmesina, whose attendant, Stefania, tightens her bodice to make her more decent. Still drawn by her beauty, Tirante kisses her hand. On his way out, Tirante pauses to catch his breath. His right-hand man, Devise, shows concern, but Tirante dismisses it as feeling off for the kingdom. The two then head to their quarters, where Tirante immediately collapses in bed. Stefania asks what happened, so Devise explains that he fainted due to an injury in battle. He then quickly brings him back by pressing his ear. While the captain rests, Devise heads to a chamber where the princess and her attendants dress out of their mourning clothes. There, he introduces himself to the attendants, which includes a poet's daughter, Pleasure. The knight then whispers to the princess that Tirante went to this empire solely for her. Overjoyed, Carmesina hugs Devise, though it also causes her nose to bleed, and her attendants promptly assist her. During a mass later on, the princess spots Tirante kneeling. Pleasure whispers that the knight always kneels during mass, so Carmesina requests them to bring him her cushion, though Ines warns her that she might risk her modesty by doing so. Nearby, Stefania eyes Devise, who smirks. Tirante soon receives the cushion and gratefully looks at Carmesina, calling her an angel. After the mass, however, Devise finds Tirante somber, admitting that he loves the princess but knows that those truly in love tend to be unfortunate. Devise advises him to hide his anguish and instead focus on their battle. Still, to return the princess's kindness, Tirante asks his friend to give his prayer book to her. On another day, as Tirante's army prepares for battle, Devise tells their captain that Carmesina is arriving to bid him farewell. When the princess arrives, Tirante tries to kiss her palm, but she pulls away. Stefania reminds her that it's an act of love, so Carmesina allows him. Once alone with him, Carmesina asks Tirante what makes him so anxious. The captain hands her a mirror in response, saying the woman within it holds his life. She sees herself through the reflection, delighting her. The princess walks out and tells Ines about his confession. The attendant scolds her, not wanting the princess to fall for a man without a high title. Instead, she believes that Tirante only seeks fame through her. This breaks Carmesina's heart, so she runs to her room to weep. Stefania assures her that her love for Tirante, even if it's only for her own desires, is better than any other kind. Pleasure adds that all women are either covetous, gluttonous, or lustful, but she's all three. Carmesina asks what Stefania is, given that she presents herself as cold. The attendant admits to being secretly lustful and assures the princess that she herself is pleasure incarnate. A bell rings, signaling the time for the knights to bid farewell to the emperor, so the attendants urge Carmesina to meet with Tirante. After the emperor blesses Tirante, Pleasure whispers to the captain that Carmesina begs to meet him. As everyone else leaves, Carmesina approaches the lone captain. There, she states that seeking the love of an emperor's daughter would incur severe punishment. Heartbroken by the statement, he announces that he would stab himself for such a grave offense. Carmesina assures him that she didn't mean it seriously. Instead, she offers to grant him a favor. The man requests that he receive her shirt and remove it with his own hands. The princess refuses, as no man should touch her. Instead, she removes her shirt with her attendant's help, and Stefania presents it to Tirante, stained with her nosebleed. Regardless, the knight inhales it lovingly. Soon, the army marches out. The empress quietly comments how Tirante's army looks like ruffians, but the emperor just hopes they free them from the Turks. That night, Pleasure and Stefania find the princess still awake in her room. They assume that she worries how her father's getting old, her mother's unfaithful to him, and with her brother gone, nobody will inherit the empire, causing it to fall. Carmesina asks what she should do, so they suggest she marry Tirante. However, the princess believes her parents won't accept the knight, so her attendants promise to make it happen. With that, Carmesina goes to her father and asks him to take her to battle so she may know about war. The emperor agrees, but only if her mother also agrees. The empress waves her finger in refusal. refusal, so her daughter gestures the bad news to her attendants. Still, the emperor calls her back, wondering about her feelings for Tirante. Carmesina denies any romantic feelings, but her mother chuckles loudly, not convinced by the lie. She then declares that they should all go to the war. The next morning, Turk scouts see the kingdom's advancing army. They inform Sultan Mehmed, though the man's still confident that they'll win. Back in the kingdom, Carmesina dreams of the battle. An apparition of pleasure whispers that Tirante's sword is invincible and his men are cunning. But an apparition of Ines repels her, saying that marrying a sultan will save the kingdom. On the battlefield, the war rages, with Tirante's forces gaining the advantage. However, the captain suffers a wound on his shoulder. Still, the wounded Tirante meets the royal family when they arrive in one of their fortresses. Above them, the princess watches while her attendants urge her to act, lest they fall into the hands of the Turks. With this, Carmesina goes to greet Tirante, who's immediately drawn to her. He asks Carmesina how they can meet, so she tells him to speak with Stefania. The next morning, Pleasure notices Stefania's eye bags, teasingly accusing her of losing blood last night through passion. Stefania admits to it just as Carmesina approaches, wondering what they're talking about. Pleasure takes the princess to a corner and asks for permission to tell her what she witnessed last night. However, with Ines hovering around, she pretends that her story is only a salacious dream. The attendant recalls when Tirante and Deiphobus were invited to their room. The right-hand man paired with Stefania and the captain with Carmesina. However, when things turned passionate, Tirante hesitated, unable to continue out of respect. On the other hand, Stefania and Deiphobus continued their encounter, so Carmesina encouraged Tirante by confessing her love. Wanting to hear more, Carmesina takes Pleasure to her bedroom and there, her attendant continues her recollection. Stefania pushed Deiphobus away for ruining her chastity. To solve this, the knight proposed to her and she accepted. In the present, Pleasure expresses her envy since no man has touched her. However, Carmesina slaps her, asserting that she's still untouched despite last night's events. She vows not to grant Tirante anything until their wedding. Later, Tirante's taken to the doctor who states that he's recovering well but needs an antiseptic. He orders the attendants to give him medicine and Carmesina personally provides it. Nearby, the empress reads from a prayer book while Tirante playfully prods the princess with his foot. Her mother notices this, so Carmesina promptly moves away while Tirante comments on rumors about the sultan asking her daughter for marriage. The empress denies this vehemently. To end the discussion, she asks her daughter to continue reading from the book. When the princess reads a passage about a woman beheading a cruel general in his sleep, she faints, so the doctor takes her away for some fresh air. As soon as everyone leaves, Ines briefly exposes herself to Tirante before leaving. Later, the captain leaves his room despite the doctor's advice. He meets with Stefania, who assures him that the princess is well. Still, he asks to see her, so she takes him to Carmesina's room, leaving the two alone. Tirante quickly joins her in bed for a moment of passion, only to be interrupted when Stefania warns them that the emperor is coming. Just as the emperor enters, Tirante pulls away and leaves to return to his room. On his way back, Stefania asks where Deiphobus is, worried that he's abandoned her. The captain assures her that he'll bring his friend back from the battlefield. With that, Tirante walks away, only for Ines to follow him. The captain confronts her, mockingly offering to find a husband for her with a suitable title. Ines refuses, saying that she only wants someone she desires. Tirante ignores this and walks away, only for Pleasure to stop him, asking him to be patient with Carmesina. When asked why they're helping them, she states that they want an emperor for their empire, not a Turk. The knight then leaves, and Pleasure blocks Ines from following him. Later, Carmesina rants to her attendants about how the doctors only advise her to eat and sleep to solve her anxiety. Ines then claims that her troubles only stem from Tirante confusing her. Curious, the princess sends the others away and asks Ines to continue. The woman insists that Tirante only wants the empire and would willingly take her maidenhood by force to humiliate her. Ines even adds that Pleasure and Stefania are deceiving her to further Tirante's plan. Carmesina's heartbroken over this, so Ines leaves triumphantly. A worried Stefania then enters, but the princess dismisses her. Though saddened, Stefania smiles when she sees Deiphobus arrive. Sometime later, Tirante announces to the emperor that he's well enough to return to battle. He also asks permission to have Stefania and Deiphobus wed. The emperor delegates the decision to his daughter, and the empress then walks away. Confused, Stefania asks why, so the empress clarifies that the emperor is avoiding responsibility because he knows they've wed in a secret encounter. Still, she consents to Stephania and Diphoebus' marriage, and Carmesina does as well. However, Stephania complains that her wedding would be festive without the emperor's blessing. Tirante merely thinks that such festivities are senseless before walking away. Pleasure catches up to him and asks him to persuade the princess to give him proof of her love before he leaves, even if it means sacrificing her purity. Tirante refuses to dishonor Carmesina, and this makes Pleasure shun him, doubting his bravery. The captain assures her that he wants the best for Carmesina. The attendant then asks why he thinks the princess doesn't want him, so he admits that he's afraid of his desires. She advises him that to win a maiden, he should not feel shame or fear. Emboldened by her words, he asks her to lead him to the princess's chambers later. That night, Pleasure sneaks him into Carmesina's bedroom. She lays before the sleeping princess and pretends to touch her, but instead guides Tirante's hand. Pleasure lies to the princess that she is only appreciating her body before slipping away and letting the captain take over. When the princess opens her eyes, however, she yelps in surprise upon seeing Tirante. Pleasure tries to cover her mouth, but Ines and the rest have already awakened and start knocking on the door. Quickly, Pleasure helps Tirante sneak out the window using a rope just in time before the empress and her attendants walk in. Carmesina pretends to cry, making up a story that a rat ran across her face. The emperor arrives with a sword, but the empress tells everyone to return to bed. Pleasure then discreetly tells Stephania that Tirante needs help, then goes back out the window and down the hallway. To her surprise, she finds the captain still dangling on the rope since it's too short. Before she can help, the emperor walks by, hunting for the rat. He turns briefly to Pleasure and appreciates her body before continuing his hunt. Below them, Tirante's unable to hold on and drops to the ground, breaking his leg. Fortunately, his squire and Diphoebus spot him and quickly take him to his quarters. Since they need a story as to how he broke his leg, Diphoebus fetches his horse. In the morning, they guide Tirante up a horse to make it look like a fall from it caused his broken leg, though the fall actually breaks his other leg too. They take him to the castle where the emperor laments that without Tirante, he shall have to lead the battle himself. However, the captain swears that he'll be ready to battle when the time comes. This satisfies the emperor, so he leaves to meet with the women, announcing the knight's injuries. This causes Carmesina to faint. Later, while Hippolytus reads passages to Tirante, Pleasure arrives and signals the squire to leave. He asks how Carmesina is and apologizes for offending her. Pleasure assures him that the princess loves him and swears that she'll make him their emperor. Meanwhile, the empress spots Hippolytus, wondering why he looks so pale. He claims he's worried about Tirante's injuries, so she shares her worries too, adding that she tends to have sleepless nights over her thoughts. Hippolytus thinks it's because she sleeps alone and unsatisfied, just like him. The empress asks who torments him, so he confesses his love for her. He walks away in shame, but the empress tells him that if he can keep it a secret, he can have her. Elsewhere, Ines sneaks into Tirante's room while he's asleep. She kisses him, but when he wakes, she quickly negotiates that he's better off with a skilled woman like her than the deceitful princess and her handmaidens. Despite this, Tirante demands her to leave, declaring that he doesn't believe her lies. With that, Ines walks to the door, though she presents herself to the knight first before leaving. With a plan in mind, Ines heads to town and purchases a large mirror. She then approaches a young peasant woman and decides to buy a dress for her. That evening, the empress dismisses her attendants early to allow her some privacy. She prepares herself for the evening, though she admits to her reflection how it must be shameful to be in love with someone so young. Still, she later welcomes Hippolytus to her bed. In the morning, a helper positions the mirror Ines purchased outside Tirante's bedroom window. Ines then visits the captain, showing him a reflection of a woman he assumes to be Carmesina outside the castle. Just then, the palace gardener joins the woman and satisfies her. Ines claims that Carmesina isn't protective of her honor to other men yet rejects Tirante, and this angers him. Outside, however, Pleasure, Stephania, and Diphoebus watch the peasant woman who's pretending to be the princess with the gardener. During this, Ines tempts the knight again, offering herself to help him forget about the supposed deceitful princess. However, Tirante chokes the woman, asserting that he can never forget his love for Carmesina. Suddenly, Pleasure, Stephania, and Diphoebus arrive with the heads of the fake princess and the gardener, showing proof of Ines' lies. The woman begs them for mercy, but Diphoebus poses to punish her as well. However, Tirante spares her, allowing her to leave. Elsewhere, Hippolytus wakes to the empress giving him a necklace as a token of her love, even promising that if she lived long enough, she'll make him an emperor. Days later, however, the emperor gets suspicious of how his wife has locked herself in her bedroom. He demands her to open the door, so the empress hurries Hippolytus manages to hide just before the door opens. The emperor walks in and inspects the room. He then notices that his wife's undressed, so the empress pretends that she must have removed her gown in her sleep, claiming that she dreamed of feeding their deceased son as a baby. This seems to convince the emperor, so he leaves. Soon, the emperor learns that one of their cities has fallen to the Turks, so he orders his knights to gather Tirante's army despite him still recovering from his broken legs. Later, Pleasure leads Carmesina to a secret window to her father's bedroom, where they see how poor his health has become. The attendant warns the princess that with his failing health and old age, the emperor might consider giving her to the Turks to make peace. Even if his health fails before coming to this decision, the empress, who's more focused on regaining her youth, will end up ruling. With this, Pleasure urges the princess to give herself to Tirante to give him more courage to lead his army and save them from the Turks. However, Carmesina wants to have a festive wedding where she'll only give herself to her husband after they're wed. Suddenly, Pleasure grabs her and reminds her that she's the princess. While her father's dying and her mother's growing mad, the empire's fate lies on her. With no choice, Carmesina and Pleasure visit the knight. The princess declares him their new king and the attendant gives him the crown she offers. Afterward, Pleasure encourages Carmesina before disrobing her and giving her to the knight. With Tirante's legs still healing, Pleasure helps the lovers in their encounter. Before proceeding, Tirante asks if this is what Carmesina wants, assuring her that he'll respect her true wishes. This delights Carmesina, confirming that his love for her is pure instead of lustful. Angered that they still refuse to be joined, Pleasure storms out in rage. Carmesina dresses herself and follows soon after. Days later, the Turkish army arrives at the palace. Their ambassador delivers their sultan's offer to marry Carmesina in exchange for returning the cities they've conquered. However, this would mean that if Carmesina gives birth to a son, he'll follow their religion and rule their empire. The emperor gives his respects to the sultan, but asks them not to force them to relinquish their Christian faith. Before he can deny this request, however, his wife quietly reminds him that Tirante is still injured, so the emperor instead asks the ambassador to give them until tomorrow to consider this deal. With that, the Turks leave. Refusing to be given to the enemy, Carmesina takes her attendants to Tirante's camp. There, the knights and attendants help the lovers in finally exchanging their passions. The next day, the emperor meets with the Turkish ambassador, accepting the deal to wed Carmesina to the sultan, but only if their future daughter will still follow the Christian faith. Before this is finalized, Carmesina and her attendants arrive and declare that the princess is carrying the knight's seed, which she prays will bear her a child. Despite the emperor's disappointment, the empress applauds her daughter and declares that there will be a war. Soon enough, Tirante's army battles with the Turks. Tirante struggles with his injuries despite Defibas' help. Still, he faces Mehmed in one-on-one combat, ultimately killing the sultan. This ends the war, though Tirante's left heavily wounded. Knowing that he's dying, the knight begs Defibas to take him to the princess. However, Tirante perishes before they can arrive at the castle. Defibas is left to deliver his final letter to Carmesina. At his funeral, Carmesina kisses Tirante's hands and begs him to return to her. When this doesn't happen, the princess prays for her own death. Months later, Defibas and Stefania sail away from Constantinople, eventually learning that Carmesina has died after refusing to eat due to her mourning. Not long after, the emperor succumbed to his illness and the empress married Hippolytus, who's now their ruler. He's promoted Pleasure as his advisor, though rumors say that she's his mistress. Meanwhile, Inez has married another soldier. Defibas can only mourn for his friend and captain, so Stefania reminds him that Tirante's sacrifice saved the people from the Turks. However, Defibas knows that this peace is only temporary.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.